The last generation Kia Sedona was really the last of the old Kias in America, and by that I mean when you took a look at the inside and the outside, it definitely looked a little dowdy. The interior was dated, the exterior was dated, the plastics going on the inside of the cabin were definitely questionable. But it's completely different for 2016 because this is a completely new Kia Sedona. Kia really has turned into the automotive equivalent of Cinderella lately. Over the last 10 years or so, they've gone from a manufacturer that made questionably styled vehicles with questionable reliability to a manufacturer that builds stylish vehicles with reliability that rivals the Japanese auto manufacturers. Kia has also lately been trying to take a slightly different approach to some of the segments that they compete in, and that is definitely going on in this 2016 Kia Sedona. You can think of this sort of as the un-minivan. It's the minivan that's trying to be a little bit more of a three-row crossover than a traditional minivan. Things start out with this front-end design that's really borrowed off of Kia's very popular Sorento crossover. We have the same sort of tiger nose grille going on here, this same sort of mesh grille that actually has these 3D components that stick out of the front. The model we're taking a look at is the completely loaded SXL trim. That means we do have the HID low beams. The high beams are still halogens right here in the center. The headlamp design is a little bit more aggressive in this model. We also have the 360-degree camera. It's actually placed right here in the middle of this grille. Radar adaptive cruise control with forward collision warning. We also have fog lamps and front parking sensors. At 201.4 inches long, this slots right in the middle of the minivan segment. This is a little bit shorter than the brand new Chrysler Pacifica or the existing Dodge Caravan, but it is a little bit longer than something like the Sienna or the Quest. As we see in the Honda Odyssey, Kia has tried to squish the third row window right back here just a little bit in order to try and give this a little bit more visual interest, make it look a little bit more like a three-row crossover and a little bit less like a traditional minivan. The modern three-row crossover really is today's minivan. In fact, the modern minivan like this and the modern three-row crossover are often very closely related to one another. We have a little bit more ground clearance going on in your average three-row crossover, but the vehicle's structure tends to be very similar. So really what's going on in the minivan is they've pushed the interior a little bit closer to the ground, they've made the rear a little bit squarer and boxier, and they've removed all-wheel drive in order to make the packaging of the vehicle more efficient. What that means to the shopper out there that is on the fence between a three-row crossover and a minivan is that you will find considerably more cargo room back here, 3 to 4 times versus some of those three-row crossovers, and you'll also find several inches more legroom and headroom back here in the third row versus something from the same manufacturer in their three-row crossover line. This is significantly larger on the inside than the Kia Sorento. Same sort of thing is going on there when you take a look at the Sienna versus the Highlander. The rear end of the Sedona was styled to look a little bit more like Kia's crossover products. We have tail lamp modules that are a little bit more similar to what we see in their other crossovers out there, although you'll notice that this is still relatively plain on the back because we have a very, very large tailgate. That's because minivans, again, as I say, go a little bit closer to the ground when it comes to the openings of the vehicles as well as the floor in the vehicle. So if you're lifting cargo into a minivan, this is much closer to the ground than your average three-row crossover. As we see in the rest of the competition, there is just one engine under this hood. It is a 3.3-liter direct injection V6 engine. It produces 276 horsepower and 248 pound-feet of torque. Even though this is one of the smaller displacement engines in this segment, thanks to the direct injection ability of this engine, it actually produces the second most power. That helps make the Sedona one of the peppier options in this segment because the weight is a little bit on the lighter side of average, between about 4,400 pounds and 4,600 pounds. Now the brand new Chrysler Pacifica is both slightly more powerful than this and slightly lighter. All that power is routed to the front wheels only via a 6-speed automatic transmission. The EPA fuel economy average of 19 to 21 miles per gallon is very similar to the rest of the minivans out there. You'll notice that the brand new Chrysler Pacifica gets a slightly better fuel economy rating thanks to its 9-speed automatic transmission, but it's really not that much different than what we're seeing in this particular model right here. This is also not much different than your average three-row front-wheel drive crossover. Kia's own Sorento, which is a little bit smaller than this, comes in right at 21 miles per gallon. Front seat comfort is excellent, but of course it varies by the model, and we are in the top-end SXL trim, which has 4-way adjustable lumbar support and the power driver's seat. You will find a power driver's seat with power lumbar support in even the LX trim, but the base L model does get a manual driver's seat. Helping accommodate drivers of different dimensions, we have a tilt telescopic steering column with a moderate range of motion and a 2-position seat memory for the driver. You should know that like other Kia models, the passenger seat is powered, but it does not offer the 4-way lumbar support that we see right here in this seat. Rear seat comfort is exceptional, and that's because Kia has pulled a page out of Toyota's playbook and given us a very, very adjustable second row seat that's optional. We're in the top-end SXL model again, so we don't have the 8-passenger configuration. In other models, there would be a middle seat right here. This model seats 7, so we get 3 people in the back, 2 people in the second row, and 2 people up front. As we see in the Sienna, the Sedona offers an ottoman that pops right up out of the seat. It also extends forward to make it a little bit more comfortable. To make this ottoman more useful, this seat slides forward and backward. Now, we've seen that in other minivans before, but there is a wheel well right back here, so the seat can't move too far rearward like that. So that's why we have another lever that actually moves this seat inboard, so that way it can actually go back further into the vehicle. It really is kind of a novel solution to the whole problem of a second row seat with ottomans. It actually makes it usable. There is, of course, yet another lever back here that reclines the seat, and these seats recline just as far as the seats up front. At this point, you're no doubt thinking to yourself, I thought he said this was the unminivan. This is sounding very minivan-like so far. Well, this really is where things stop looking like most minivans, because none of the second row seats in any Sedona model actually come out of the vehicle anymore. Instead, they just scoot forward towards the front like we see in your average crossover. So, for instance, this lever scoots the seat that far forward. If we pull this lever right here, the seat collapses forward. And in the SXL trim, this is as compact as it gets. If you get trims L through SX, then the seats still don't come out of the minivan. However, they do move in a slightly more convenient fashion. The seat bottom cushion sort of folds down. The seat completely collapses against the back of the front seat. That allows you to put things from the back all the way into just about 6 inches from the back of the front seat. Again, not quite as handy as a minivan with removable or stow-and-go second row seats, but perhaps a little bit more comfortable. One thing worth noting while we're talking about second row seats is that Chrysler's minivan, and that includes the new Pacifica, the second row seats are not quite as comfortable as the rest of the competition. The reason for that is the way the seats have to be able to move and fold into the floor just doesn't allow them to give as much padding as basically every other entry in this segment. In truth, minivans really all are about the third row, because that is what separates the minivans from the 3-row crossovers. In this third row seat, I have more headroom than you'll find in your average 3-row crossover, although our model does have this optional panoramic sunroof. There are actually 2 sunroofs, one over the driver and front passenger area and one right here over the second row. Unfortunately, this does mean that we lose about 2 inches of headroom in this particular model versus the rest of the Sedona lineup. That means that headroom would definitely be acceptable for me in the third row in those other models, but in this SXL trim, it's just about the same as the average 3-row crossover. What isn't the same is legroom, however, because this second row seat is very comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, as is that front passenger seat. And if I scoot over here to the right, you'll notice I have about 5 or 6 inches of legroom left right there. The seat bottom cushion is also not slammed to the floor like we see in 3-row crossovers. As you'd expect from a minivan, creature comforts are also a little bit better back here than your average 3-row crossover. We have air conditioning vents right here in the ceiling for the third row, 2 cup holders on each side for the third row, as well as small window shades right here as well. Like the second row, the third row seats recline. There's a little bit of webbing right over here that I pull, and these seats recline further than you find in your average 3-row crossover. Cargo room really is the big difference between the average minivan and the average 3-row crossover. As you can see, most of my body is right here below this bumper height, and actually I can completely fit under here out of sight, thanks to the extremely deep cargo well. We have 2 to 3 times the cargo space back here than you find in your average 3-row crossover. This is about 3 times what you find in Kia's Sorento and over twice what you find in something like a Toyota Highlander. And of course, if you fold down the third row seats, we get even more, and these third row seats also, with the flip of another handle, go completely into the cargo floor, allowing you to put long items all the way from the back of that second row seat right here to the back of the vehicle. You should also know that this opening is much larger than you find in your average 3-row crossover, so if you're putting large items like dog kennels, that sort of thing, into your vehicle, they're going to fit an awful lot easier in here than they would in something like a Highlander. The first thing you'll notice about the Sedona on the inside is how much more this looks like a crossover than your traditional minivan. And the reason for most of that is right here in the center console, because it actually has a center console like a crossover instead of a minivan. Most minivans, the area between the front seat and the driver's seat right here, you could put large items like purses or large bags in. Obviously, you can't do that when we have a large console like this, but this does give it more of a traditional car-like or crossover-like feel. Starting out with the middle seats, we have height adjustable seat belts. Right over there, as you can see, we have roller shades built right into the sliding doors, and that's where you'll find the controls for the rear zone HVAC system that our model does have. Height adjustable seat belts for both the driver and the front passenger as well. And again, our model does have the leather interior, and these are both heated and ventilated seats. The doors feature soft touch plastics in the upper portion, so this brown portion and the tan portion, those are both soft. We have a soft touch armrest and then faux wood trim on that door handle. We have two different storage cubbies, and the lower portion of the door is made out of hard touch plastic. So zooming in there, you'll notice we have one cubby right there below that armrest, and then another storage cubby right there with a bottle holder by the speaker grill. The dashboard is a soft touch injection molded part, and we have two different glove boxes. This upper glove box has a soft touch coating to it as well. It's relatively small, but you can fit things like cell phones, wallets, that sort of thing on inside there. Obviously not quite large enough to store things like tablet computers. And then below that, we have a large bin-style glove compartment. I was able to fit an iPad inside there. Notice that the instruction manual is quite large. There are two large air vents on either side of this infotainment screen. You'll find the engine start-stop button right over here, a single slot optical player above the screen. If you want to know more about this infotainment system, go ahead and click that banner at the bottom of the screen. You'll be taken on over to our dedicated review of this UVO system. Below that, you'll find the physical buttons that relate to that infotainment system. We do have direct access buttons to things like radio, media, our UVO system, phone, map, navigation, info, and setup. In addition, we have a tune button right over here. This also serves as a scroll button on some screens, and then we have a power volume knob on the left. Below that, you'll find the controls for the optional tri-zone automatic climate control system. The climate button takes you to the climate display page on the UVO infotainment system above. We have three different zones. We have driver, we have front passenger, and then we have the rear of the vehicle. You can enable or disable the rear climate control system from the front, or you can actually lock it out as well, so that way the rear passengers can't play with it. As I said, one of the major differences between the Sedona and the other options in this segment is that we actually have a center console. So this is where you'll find the gear shifter. We also have a USB input, auxiliary input right there. They're not hidden away in any sort of storage bin, and two large cup holders hidden behind that slider. Now on the passenger side of the center console is actually a small storage bin down there and an additional 12-volt outlet sort of in the passenger's footwell. The gear shift knob is fairly traditional. Park is all the way up to the top, drive is all the way down to the bottom, and if you want the manual mode, that's over to the left, up for up, and down for down. Behind the gear shifter is where you'll find the controls for the optional heated and ventilated seats. That's the driver and the front passenger. We also have a heated steering wheel button, and then we have a drive mode button. This changes the way the engine and transmission behave, parking sense, enable, disable, and the button to enable or disable the 360 camera. Continuing behind that, we have a large padded center armrest, and this slides forward and backward so you can adjust it a little bit more comfortably. It also opens to reveal sort of a two-tiered storage area. We have this one divider that slides forward and backward, and then below that you'll notice that we have a very large and deep storage bin. You can easily put things like wallets, bags, gallons of milk inside, slid all the way to the back even. And this is also where you'll find an additional 12-volt power port and a USB charge-only port. The instrument cluster is styled very similarly to the other Kia models in the US. We have red needles, white numbers, and then black faces on the gauges. There are only two real dials. We have a tachometer over here on the left, a speedometer on the right, and then we have a digital engine temperature gauge and a digital fuel level gauge on the right side. In between those two dials, we have a large color multifunction display. The multifunction display is where you'll find things like your trip computer A and B, also navigation instructions if you have navigation on your vehicle and you have a destination programmed in. Since we don't have a destination programmed in, we just have this compass rose. We also have the status of our various safety systems in the vehicle, our audio system, what it's doing, and a service reminder telling you when you need various services on your vehicle. We also have the ability to adjust various vehicle settings right here in this display, so we can change the way the driving assistance systems behave. You can also change the behavior of the power doors, power tailgates, lights, etc. The steering wheel is a 3-spoke design, and because we're in the top end trim, we have a faux wood portion to the top of the steering wheel. Ours is heated, but this faux wood portion is not, so just the leather wrap on each side is actually heated. On the right side of the steering wheel is where you'll find that button I showed you earlier that controls that screen as well as its rotary knob right there. We also have the radar adaptive cruise control buttons: enable, disable, cancel, set speed up and down, and of course the follow distance. On the left side of the steering wheel, we'll find a volume rotary knob. We also have track up, down, mode button, voice command button, and dedicated phone hang-up and pickup buttons. The important thing to remember really about any minivan out on the road is that I think they get a little bit of a bad reputation. Because personally, I prefer the way the average minivan drives to the way the average large 3-row crossover drives. You see, the average 3-row crossover really is just a minivan with all-wheel drive added that's been jacked up a few inches. And that increased ride height means that we get more body roll, more tip and dive, and generally slightly sloppier handling. Now, there are obviously exceptions to that, of course, as there are with any vehicle out there, but I'm talking about generalities. As with every other vehicle classification out there, weight is of course a very important factor when it comes to all manners of vehicle performance. The Sedona is relatively light in this category. This is just about the same weight as the brand new Chrysler Pacifica, which has lost a decent amount of weight in this latest version. Thanks to the relatively light curb weight and this relatively powerful V6 engine, we ran from 0 to 60 in 8.6 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and give this an A when it comes to minivans, but I would also say that the A score actually applies to V6 3-row crossovers as well. You'll definitely find similar or slightly longer 0 to 60 times in those larger 3-row crossovers out there, like the Chevy Traverse, the GMC Acadia, or the Nissan Pathfinder. In terms of braking, the wide tires that every Sedona model wears definitely helps the braking score. We ran from 60 to 0 in 135 feet, so I'm going to go ahead and give this an A there as well. You'll definitely notice that some of the minivans available in the United States start out with narrower tires, and they're actually heavier than this, so that's generally going to mean you're going to get a longer stopping distance. 135 feet may sound a little bit long for your average mid-size sedan, but it's actually fairly good for a large 3-row vehicle. When it comes to handling, the Sedona drives like a large heavy sedan, not really like a truck or a 3-row crossover. Again, as I said earlier, we don't get nearly as much body roll or tip and dive in this vehicle as you do see in those 3-row crossovers. All-wheel drive definitely helps with traction, but it can also aid handling. Traction is an area where a minivan like this is going to fall behind the average all-wheel drive crossover, because this will very easily spin its front tires. However, when it comes to corner carving out on your favorite winding mountain road, the Sedona does very well for itself. Although the Sedona handles fairly well for a minivan, the ride is not punishing. This definitely soaks up the larger bumps and imperfections out on the road, although we do feel a little bit more of the small imperfections, especially coming from the rear. Again, keep in mind this does have a relatively high payload capacity for a 3-row vehicle, so if you add people in the back, it's going to settle the rear end ride down just a little bit. In terms of cabin noise, we scored 72 decibels at 50 miles an hour, which is fairly average for the 3-row crossover or the minivan segment. Although we haven't had too much time to spend in the brand new Chrysler Pacifica, it did seem to be just a little bit quieter out on the road. When it comes to fuel economy, the weight and the engine are important to keep in mind. This does have a 3.3-liter V6 engine. The vehicle weighs about 4,400 pounds. This is heavier than something like a 3-row Kia Sorento because it is a decent amount larger. Therefore, the 19 mile per gallon average is not terribly surprising. In our real-world driving, we have been getting around 18.5 miles per gallon, but that's very similar to what we get in most 3-row crossovers as well. If you get a larger 3-row crossover like the GMC Acadia, for instance, you may actually get around 15 to 16 miles per gallon depending on your driving, because those vehicles are even heavier than this minivan. Pricing for the Sedona starts at $26,400. That means that if Chrysler ends up canceling the Dodge Caravan, this will be the least expensive minivan available in the United States. At this time, it seems that Chrysler may be selling the new Pacifica minivan as well as the old Caravan minivan at the same time. And the current generation Caravan is about $4,000 less expensive than this if you do get the absolute base trim. The next step up from there is the $28,500 LX trim that gets you an upgraded sound system, more comfortable seats, tinted windows, roof rails, and power folding side view mirrors like we see on this particular model. That $28,500 price point is less expensive than comparably equipped minivans from the competition, with the possible exception of the Nissan Quest. Now, the Nissan Quest is definitely a little bit smaller than this. It's also one of the older options in this segment. As we see in other Kia models, there are a few options to choose from, so you really just have to select the different trim levels, and then of course there may be an option package or two available in each trim level. The next step up from there is the $32,700 EX trim that gets you an awful lot of equipment. We have the leather interior, backup sensors, fog lamps, power doors on each side, as well as the power tailgate, upgraded infotainment, automatic climate control for all 3 zones, and heated seats in the front. For an extra $4,000, we go up to the SX trim, which doesn't change the engine like we see in other Kia models. Again, all models do use that same 3.3-liter V6 that just adds extra luxury features, and basically everything that's optional on the EX becomes standard on the SX. The next step up from there is the SXL, which is what we've been driving here. That starts at $39,900. As we saw in the other trim, most things that are optional in the SX become standard in the SXL, and then we get an upgrade to the leather, from standard leather to Nappa leather, which is a soft type that you normally find in luxury vehicles. We get even more luxury features, and we have the option to add a $2,800 tech package. The tech package brings the HID headlamps that we're seeing in this particular model, the 360-degree camera system, as well as the radar adaptive cruise control and collision warning. Around $43,000 after destination may sound like an awful lot to pay for a minivan, but this is actually one of the least expensive fully loaded options in this particular segment. You will definitely pay more for top-end, similarly configured trims of the Toyota, the Chrysler, or the Honda. Starting out our competition segment, let's talk about the Mercedes-Benz Metris first. A lot of people have been emailing me asking about that Mercedes model, and it's a little bit different than every other minivan in this segment. It is about the same size as the vehicle that we've been taking a look at here, only it's an awful lot squarer. So it actually has a little bit more room on the inside, and very differently than every other minivan out there, it's rear-wheel drive because it is based on other Mercedes-Benz rear-wheel drive vehicles. The Mercedes-Benz is very, very European, and the average European minivan is quite different than the average American minivan. Things inside the Metris definitely have a very industrial flavor to them, from the seat rails on the floor for the second row and third row seats to the overall design of the dashboard in that vehicle. The Metris is also fairly expensive for this segment. It's going to cost you a significant amount more if you're taking a look at base models to step up from a base model of this Kia right here over to that Mercedes. Now, the Metris is going to be one of the more fun to drive options in this segment because of its rear-wheel drive nature. However, you should know that it's also going to be more expensive to insure and more expensive to maintain than basically any other minivan. Nissan's Quest is getting a little bit old these days, and it's really showing on the outside and on the inside. This front-end look on the Kia is definitely more attractive than we're seeing in that Nissan Quest. Same thing goes on the inside. We don't have the same sort of modern luxury touches or available features or options that we see in this model or basically any of the other minivans out there. The Quest also doesn't have some of the convenience features that we see in most of the minivans in this segment. Fuel economy and seat comfort in the Quest have been very good, but reliability with that continuously variable transmission has been a little bit questionable, and some people really don't like the way that that transmission shifts. The Dodge Caravan may be getting old, but there is a reason that Chrysler sells so many more minivans than anybody else. It's all down to the practicality. Again, this particular model does have that very convenient third row seat, but the second row seats don't come out of the vehicle at all. That's not what we see over there in the Caravan. In addition to being the least expensive option in this segment by thousands of dollars, that Caravan's second row seat also folds flat into the floor. That means that if you're at your favorite home improvement store or IKEA and you want to get a 4x8 something and you want to stick it in your minivan, you can actually do that on the spur of the moment with that Caravan. And you can't do that in this vehicle at all because these seats just don't come out of the way. Since they just collapse up front, you still can't fit a 4x8 sheet of something completely inside the vehicle. Kia says that their average customer generally doesn't remove the second row seats or isn't interested in removing the second row seats, and that's why they've left them fixed into position and instead given you more comfortable seats. In a nutshell, the Caravan is the vehicle that prioritizes practicality and pragmatism over luxury features, styling, or creature comforts. Toyota recently gave their Sienna a very mild refresh, improving the interior a little bit, touching the exterior a tiny hair. The Sienna is still the only all-wheel drive minivan in this segment, so if you're looking at something like this, but you want all-wheel drive, then the Sienna really is going to be your only option. However, you should know that in order to get all-wheel drive in the Sienna, they do have to remove the spare tire. Even though it was refreshed recently, it was a very mild refresh, and therefore the majority of the Sienna is definitely older than this, and it is starting to show its age. The second row seats may have been first to the Ottoman game in this segment, but these seats beat Toyota at their own game. They're more comfortable, they're more adjustable, they move further rearward in the vehicle, allowing you to use that Ottoman more than you would be able to in the Sienna. We also have the dual sunroof thing that we saw in that Toyota minivan, only they're a little bit bigger in this option. Personally, I would actually skip the sunroof because I think it compromises headroom just a little bit too much in the third row and in the second row, and really that is one of the reasons to buy a minivan is for that expanded room in the back. Honda's Odyssey is probably the quintessential family minivan. They have jammed more latch anchors in that interior than any other vehicle available in the United States. It's big, it's boxy towards the rear, it has a very comfortable third row seat. It also has nice handy features in there like a built-in vacuum. However, it definitely looks more like a minivan, in my opinion, than this particular model we're looking at right here. The Odyssey is also a little bit more practical than the Kia because its second row seats actually come out of the vehicle. However, overall, the majority of the differences really come down to personal preference and style. The Odyssey really is more of a classic minivan. It's especially obvious when you take a look at the interior styling, and again, that second row seat that comes out of the vehicle. This is trying to be a minivan with a little bit of crossover flair. When it comes to styling, I personally think that the front end look, especially on this vehicle, is the most attractive minivan in America, and that includes the brand new Chrysler Pacifica. In terms of styling, this definitely looks a little bit more like your average three-row crossover, and the Pacifica definitely looks like a minivan. On the flip side, of course, the Pacifica still has that very practical fold-in second row seat. So again, if you end up at the IKEA or at the Home Depot and you want to put something large in the vehicle and you hadn't prepared in advance, you couldn't do that in any other minivan. But in the Chrysler Pacifica, you just fold down all rows of the seats and you just jam whatever it is you want in the back. With the brand new Pacifica, Chrysler also gives us the most advanced infotainment system and rear seat entertainment system available in this particular segment. When it comes to luxury features, the SXL does very well, but the Pacifica does a little bit better for that new model. We have an enormous panoramic sunroof that goes all the way from the front to quite far back in the vehicle. We also get a little bit more headroom even when it's equipped with that sunroof than we find in this particular model. Chrysler has also added all of their latest safety systems and driver's aids to the Pacifica, in addition to the brand new Pacifica plug-in hybrid that will be coming out very soon. Of course, the Pacifica won't have anything on this second row seat, and the interior styling overall is definitely minivan, while this is definitely trying to be more of a crossover. You may find the dashboard and center console design to be a little bit less practical than the Pacifica, but the styling is definitely more crossover-like. So if you're on the fence and you're thinking to yourself, I really don't want a minivan, but I need a minivan and I'd rather have a three-row crossover, that's exactly what Kia was going for with the Sedona. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2016 Kia Sedona. Be sure and hit that subscribe button down there if you haven't already done so, and I'll see you next week.